Did you know that the brutal sport you see in rollerball wasn't just movie magic, real athletes getting hurt on camera? In 1975, a film appeared that looked like science fiction but felt like a warning. Director Norman Jewison wanted to show what happens when corporations control everything, when people lose their names and become numbers, when violence becomes entertainment. The movie Rollerball wasn't just about a game. It was about freedom, identity, and fighting back when the world tells you to disappear. Behind every brutal scene, every crash, every moment of rebellion, there were real risks, real injuries, and real creativity. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about rollerball. Number 20. The sport was built before the script was finished. When Norman Jewison decided to make rollerball, he faced an unusual problem. The script talked about a violent future sport, but nobody knew what that sport actually looked like. So, Jewison did something backwards. He built the game first, then rewrote parts of the movie to match what worked in real life. He hired real roller derby skaters, motorcycle riders, and stunt performers. Together, they invented rules, designed tracks, and tested moves. They crashed into walls, fell off motorcycles, and figured out what looked exciting versus what looked silly. The director filmed these test sessions and watched them over and over. He noticed that real falls looked more shocking than choreographed ones. He saw that speed mattered more than fancy tricks. So he told the writer to change dialogue, add scenes, and cut moments that didn't match the reality of the sport they'd created. Most movies start with words and build action around them. Rollerball started with action and built words around that. Jewison believed the game had to feel real before the story could feel real. He was right. Audiences watched Rollerball and believed this sport could actually exist. They didn't know the sport existed before the final script did. What looked like careful planning was actually creative chaos turned into art. Number 19. James Caan actually got hurt during filming. James Caan wasn't just acting tough in Rollerball. He was actually getting bruised, battered, and bloodied. The actor insisted on doing many of his own stunts because he wanted Jonathan E. to feel authentic. He trained with roller derby athletes for weeks, learning to skate fast while staying balanced. He practiced falling without breaking bones and blocking hits without flinching. But training couldn't prevent everything. During one scene, Caan took a real hit from another skater and crashed hard into a metal railing. The camera kept rolling. His grimace wasn't acting. His limp wasn't choreographed. The medics rushed over between takes to check for fractures. Caan waved them off, caught his breath, and did another take. In a different sequence, he fell wrong and jammed his shoulder. The pain shot through his arm, but he finished the scene anyway. Later, the director asked if he wanted a stunt double. Caan refused. He believed that if Jonathan E. was supposed to be the toughest player in the world, then the audience needed to see real toughness, not movie tricks. So every time you watch Rollerball and see Caan wince or stumble, remember that some of those reactions were genuine. The actor bled for his character. He limped for his art. That wasn't acting, it was real pain turned into powerful cinema. Number 18. The Rollerball Arena was a real sports venue. The massive arena where the game takes place wasn't a Hollywood set built on a soundstage. It was the Basketball Halle in Munich, Germany, a real sports facility used for actual competitions. Norman Jewison chose this location because he wanted scale and authenticity. He needed thousands of seats, proper lighting, and a space large enough for motorcycles and skaters to reach high speeds. Building something that big in a studio would cost a fortune and still look fake. So the production team flew to Germany and transformed a basketball venue into a futuristic stadium. They installed the circular track, added corporate banners, and filled the stands with extras dressed in elegant future fashion. The German crew worked around the clock to meet the schedule. They built ramps, secured barriers, and tested every inch of the track for safety. Well, as much safety as a movie about a deadly sport could have. When filming began, the echoes were real. The roar of motorcycles bounced off concrete walls. The sound of skates scraping the track filled the massive space naturally. No sound effects could replicate that. Jewison knew that audiences would feel the difference between a real arena and a fake one, even if they couldn't explain why. The location gave Rollerball weight and presence. It made the future feel solid, not like a fantasy. When you see those wide shots of the crowd and the track, you're looking at a real place, filled with real energy. The future was built inside the past, and it worked perfectly. Number 16. Real roller derby stars played the athletes. Norman Jewison didn't want actors pretending to skate. He wanted real skaters who could also act a little. So he hired professional roller derby athletes, people who spent their lives on wheels, crashing into each other at high speed. These weren't Hollywood stunt performers learning a new skill. These were champions who knew how to fall, how to hit, and how to keep moving even when hurt. The production team scouted roller derby leagues across America and Europe looking for the best. They found women and men who could skate backwards, spin in tight circles, and absorb impacts that would break ordinary people. Jewison brought them to Munich and asked them to make the game look real. And they did. They taught James Caan and the other actors how to move, how to balance, how to look dangerous. But more importantly, they filled the background of every game scene with authentic motion. When you watch Rollerball, the players zooming past in the background aren't extras shuffling around. They're real athletes performing real moves. Some of them got hurt during filming, bruises, cuts, twisted ankles. They kept going because that's what roller derby skaters do. They live for the crash, the speed, the thrill. Jewison captured that spirit on camera. The energy you feel during the game scenes isn't manufactured. It's real adrenaline, real skill, real danger. The director knew that no amount of editing or special effects could replace genuine talent, so he found the best and let them loose. The result was a sport that felt alive, brutal, and absolutely real. Number 15. The film was banned in several countries. Rollerball shocked audiences with its violence and dark vision of the future. Some countries didn't just dislike it, they banned it completely. Government censors in South Africa, Singapore, and several other nations declared the film too violent, too political, or too dangerous. They worried it would inspire rebellion or desensitize people to brutality. In some places, the ban wasn't about violence at all. It was about the message. Rollerball showed a future where corporations controlled governments, where individual freedom disappeared, where entertainment replaced real life. That idea terrified some leaders. They didn't want their citizens thinking about corporate power or questioning authority. So they banned the film, claiming it was offensive or harmful. In other countries, censors demanded cuts. They wanted the most brutal moments removed, the blood reduced, the political speeches softened. Norman Jewison refused most of these changes. He believed the violence was necessary. It wasn't there to entertain. It was there to disturb, to make people uncomfortable, to show what happens when society loses its humanity. Some theaters that did show the film faced protests. Religious groups picketed screenings, calling the movie immoral. Conservative critics wrote angry reviews accusing Jewison of promoting chaos. But other viewers saw something deeper. They saw a warning, a story about fighting for identity in a world that wanted everyone to be the same. The bans and protests only made the film more famous. People wanted to see what was so dangerous. They smuggled copies across borders, screened it in secret, talked about it in whispers. Rollerball became more than a movie. It became a symbol. And symbols are always harder to ban than films. Number 14. The tree burning scene used a real ancient tree. One of the most disturbing scenes in Rollerball happens at a decadent party where wealthy elites burn trees for fun. They set a massive ancient tree on fire and watch it burn while sipping champagne. It's a moment of casual cruelty, showing how the powerful destroy beauty without thought. What most people don't know is that the tree was real. Not a prop, not a model, but an actual tree. Norman Jewison found a dead tree on private land in Germany. The owners had planned to cut it down anyway, so Jewison asked if he could use it for the film. They agreed. The crew transported the tree to the location, positioned it carefully, and prepared it for the scene. When the cameras rolled, they actually set it on fire. The flames were real. The smoke was real. The heat was intense. The actors standing nearby felt the warmth on their faces, smelled the burning wood, watched the fire consume something that had lived for decades. Jewison wanted that reaction. He wanted the cast to feel uncomfortable, to experience the wrongness of destroying something old and beautiful. Number 13. The movie predicted modern reality TV and extreme sports when Rollerball was released in 1975. It seemed like pure science fiction. A brutal sport designed to entertain the masses and keep them distracted? Corporations controlling entertainment and using it to manipulate society? It sounded extreme, impossible, far-fetched. But look around today. Reality television shows put people in dangerous situations for ratings. Mixed martial arts competitions broadcast fighters hurting each other while millions watch. Social media companies control what we see, shaping opinions and behaviors. The world didn't turn into exactly what Rollerball showed, but it moved closer than anyone expected. Norman Jewison and writer William Harrison weren't just imagining a random future. They were extrapolating from trends they already saw. Television was becoming more violent. Sports were getting more extreme. Corporations were growing more powerful. They asked a simple question: what if these trends continued? What if violence became the main entertainment? What if people stopped caring about freedom because they were too busy watching brutal games? The film was a warning, not a prediction. But warnings and predictions sometimes look the same. When you watch Rollerball now, it doesn't feel as distant as it should. The game looks like a more extreme version of things we already have. The corporate control looks like a sharper version of what already exists. The distracted, passive audience looks familiar. We haven't reached the world of Rollerball, but we've walked toward it. The movie's genius was showing where we might end up if we don't pay attention, if we let entertainment replace thought, if we trade freedom for comfort. Jewison didn't know how close his fiction would come to reality. But he knew enough to sound the alarm. And the alarm still rings today. Number 11. The final game took 3 weeks to film. The climactic game at the end of Rollerball is the most brutal and chaotic sequence in the film. It's also the longest to shoot. Norman Jewison spent 3 full weeks filming that final match, capturing every crash, every death, every moment of escalating violence. The game starts with rules and slowly descends into pure mayhem. Players die on camera. The crowd cheers louder. Jonathan E. keeps playing, refusing to quit, becoming a symbol of resistance. Filming this required incredible coordination. Jewison used multiple cameras to capture different angles simultaneously. He couldn't ask the stunt performers to repeat dangerous moves over and over, so he had to get everything right in as few takes as possible. The skaters and motorcycle riders rehearsed constantly, planning crashes and falls down to the second. But even with planning, things went wrong. People got hurt. Equipment broke. The motorcycles overheated. The track became slippery with fake blood and sweat. Jewison kept pushing. He wanted exhaustion on camera, real fatigue, genuine desperation. So he filmed long takes, making the actors and stunt performers skate until they could barely stand. The sweat you see is real. The heavy breathing is real. The stumbling and slow reactions aren't always acting. Some of it is pure physical exhaustion. The director also shot the sequence in chronological order, which is unusual. He wanted the final game to feel like a journey from structure to chaos. The cast and crew experienced that journey in real time. By the end of 3 weeks, everyone was drained. They'd lived inside the violence, felt its weight, understood its cost. That understanding shows on screen. The final game isn't just action. It's a descent into madness, filmed by people who'd gone through that descent themselves. 3 weeks of controlled chaos, all for one unforgettable sequence. Number 10. The composer created a score mixing classical and electronic music. Music plays a crucial role in Rollerball, and composer Andrew Previn faced a unique challenge. The film needed a score that sounded futuristic but also timeless, brutal but also elegant. Previn's solution was brilliant. He mixed classical orchestration with electronic music, creating a soundscape that felt both familiar and alien. For the game sequences, he used driving, percussive electronic sounds. Synthesizers pulsed like heartbeats, drums pounded like the crashes on the track. The music didn't just accompany the action. It became part of the violence, pushing the energy higher and higher. But for the quieter moments, Previn used traditional orchestral arrangements. Strings carried the sadness and isolation Jonathan E. felt. Soft piano melodies highlighted the emptiness of the corporate world. The contrast was intentional. The electronic sounds represented the cold, mechanized future. The classical sounds represented the humanity struggling to survive inside that future. Previn also made an unusual choice. He used pieces of classical music directly in the film, not as background, but as part of the world. The corporate elites listened to Bach and Shostakovich at their parties. They've taken humanity's greatest art and turned it into wallpaper, something to fill silence while they destroy the world. This wasn't an accident. Jewison and Previn wanted to show how the powerful consume culture without understanding it, how beauty can exist alongside cruelty. The score for Rollerball wasn't just music. It was a commentary, a tool, a character in its own right. Previn understood that the film's message needed to be felt as much as heard, so he created a soundscape that unsettled, moved, and lingered in the mind. The music played, and the future sounded like a warning. Number 9. James Caan disagreed with the director about the ending. The ending of Rollerball is ambiguous and powerful. Jonathan E. survives the final game, standing alone on the track while the crowd chants his name. He's won, but the victory feels hollow. The future is uncertain. The corporations still have power. Jonathan is just one man. Norman Jewison loved this ending. He wanted ambiguity, wanted the audience to leave unsettled, questioning what happens next. James Caan hated it. The actor believed the ending was too vague, too unsatisfying. He argued with Jewison repeatedly. Caan wanted Jonathan to lead a revolution, to inspire the masses to rise up against corporate control. He wanted a clear, triumphant ending where good defeats evil. Jewison refused. He explained that revolutions don't start with one dramatic moment. Change is slow, uncertain, incomplete. Jonathan's victory wasn't about destroying the system. It was about refusing to disappear. It was about one man standing up and saying no. That act, small and personal, mattered more than any explosion or dramatic speech. The debates between actor and director were intense. Caan walked off set once, frustrated and convinced the film needed a different ending. Jewison didn't budge. He believed that tidy endings lied. Real life doesn't wrap up neatly. Jonathan's survival was a beginning, not an ending. The chanting crowd could mean hope or could mean nothing. The corporations might fall or might adapt. That uncertainty was the point. Eventually, Caan accepted the ending, though he never fully agreed with it. He trusted Jewison's vision even when it clashed with his own. Later, Caan admitted the director was right. The ambiguous ending made Rollerball more powerful, more haunting. It stuck with people because it didn't give easy answers. It made them think. And sometimes, making people think is the most revolutionary act of all. Number 7. The motorcycles were custom built for the film. The motorcycles used in Rollerball weren't standard bikes modified for the movie. They were custom-built machines designed specifically for the game. The production team worked with motorcycle engineers to create bikes that could handle high speeds on a circular track while carrying riders who needed to grab, throw, and hit other players. The bikes had to be fast, maneuverable, and stable. They also had to look futuristic without looking silly. The engineers designed sleek, low-profile motorcycles with wide tires for grip. They adjusted the engines for quick acceleration and smooth handling on curves. They added protective cages around certain parts to prevent damage during crashes. Then they tested the bikes endlessly. Riders pushed them to their limits, finding out what worked and what failed. The riders loved them. The bikes handled beautifully, responding instantly to commands. Number 6. The corporate executives were modeled on real business leaders. The cold, emotionless corporate leaders in Rollerball weren't random characters. Norman Jewison and writer William Harrison based them on real business executives and political figures from the 1970s. They studied how powerful men spoke, how they justified cruelty with calm logic, how they hid aggression behind polite language. Jewison watched interviews with oil company CEOs, defense contractors, and government officials. He noticed patterns. These men rarely raised their voices. They smiled while discussing layoffs. They used clinical language to describe human suffering. They talked about efficiency, optimization, market forces. They never mentioned the people crushed by their decisions. Jewison wanted the corporate bosses in Rollerball to feel exactly like that, so he coached the actors to stay calm, to speak softly, to never show anger. The villain in Rollerball isn't a screaming tyrant. He's a reasonable man explaining why Jonathan E. must retire. He's polite, patient, almost kind. That's what makes him terrifying. The actor John Houseman played the lead corporate executive, Bartholomew. Houseman brought a quiet authority to the role, a sense of absolute certainty. He never doubted his own righteousness. He believed he was helping society by controlling it. Houseman based his performance on real executives he'd met, men who genuinely believed their power was justified. The other corporate characters followed this pattern. They wore elegant suits. They spoke in measured tones. They discussed violence and control like business strategies. Because to them, that's exactly what they were. Jewison's genius was showing that the most dangerous villains aren't monsters. They're ordinary people who've convinced themselves that cruelty is logical. The corporate executives in Rollerball are villains you might meet in real life, which makes them unforgettable. Number 4. The film was a box office disappointment despite critical praise. When Rollerball was released in the summer of 1975, critics praised it. They called it smart, provocative, visually stunning. They appreciated its dark vision and social commentary. But audiences stayed away. The film made only modest money at the box office, far less than the studio hoped. Why did this happen? Several reasons. First, Rollerball was dark and depressing during a time when audiences wanted escapism. The 1970s were filled with economic trouble, political scandals, and social upheaval. People went to movies to forget their problems, not to think about dystopian futures. Second, the marketing was confusing. Advertisements showed the violent game but didn't explain the deeper themes. Some viewers expected a simple action movie and felt disappointed by the philosophical elements. Others avoided it because it looked too violent and disturbing. Third, the film had no clear heroes or happy endings. Jonathan E. survives, but the world doesn't change. There's no triumphant victory, no emotional resolution. Audiences in 1975 preferred clearer narratives with satisfying conclusions. Rollerball offered questions instead of answers, and that made it a tough sell. The studio was disappointed. They'd invested significant money and expected a hit. Jewison was frustrated but not surprised. He'd made the film he wanted to make, even knowing it might not be commercially successful. He believed some stories needed to be told regardless of profit. Over time, Rollerball found its audience. Home video, cable television, and later streaming introduced it to new generations. People who missed it in theaters discovered it later and recognized its brilliance. Critics reassessed it, calling it ahead of its time. Today, Rollerball is considered a classic, a bold film that refused to compromise. The box office didn't reflect its true value. Art rarely does. Number 3. The Zero computer was played by a real supercomputer. In one of the film's most memorable scenes, Jonathan E. visits a library and speaks with Zero, a supercomputer that supposedly holds all human knowledge. Zero is malfunctioning, losing data, forgetting entire centuries. The scene is both funny and terrifying. What audiences didn't know was that Zero was based on a real computer. The production team filmed in an actual computer research facility in Germany. The massive machines you see in the background weren't props. They were functioning supercomputers used for scientific research. In the 1970s, computers filled entire rooms. They used magnetic tapes, punch cards, and miles of wiring. They looked impressive, but were incredibly limited compared to modern technology. Jewison loved the visual contrast. These enormous machines, buzzing and blinking, represented the pinnacle of human achievement. Yet in the film, they're failing. Zero can't remember basic history. It's lost information, scrambled data, become unreliable. The librarian explains that the computer summarized everything to save space, then destroyed the originals. Now those summaries are corrupted, and the knowledge is gone forever. This wasn't just science fiction. It was a warning about over-reliance on technology. Jewison worried that digitizing everything without keeping physical backups could lead to massive loss. If the computers fail, if the data corrupts, if the systems collapse, what happens to human knowledge? The scene asked these questions using a real supercomputer as a prop. The researchers who worked in that facility watched the filming with interest. They understood the risks Jewison was highlighting. They knew computers could fail. They'd seen data loss, system crashes, irreversible errors. The scene resonated because it was based on truth. Technology is powerful, but it's also fragile. Zero represented that fragility. One machine, one warning, one unforgettable scene. Number 2. James Caan trained for 3 months before filming. James Caan's performance as Jonathan E. required more than acting talent. It required physical skill, endurance, and courage. Caan couldn't just pretend to be the world's greatest rollerball player. He had to move like one, skate like one, look believable in every frame. So he trained for 3 months before filming began. He worked with professional roller derby skaters who taught him balance, speed, and technique. He practiced skating for hours every day, building muscle memory and confidence. At first, he fell constantly. Skating, while dodging other players, while moving at high speed, while wearing heavy padding, isn't easy. Caan bruised his knees, twisted his ankles, and crashed into walls, but he kept practicing. He was determined to do as many stunts as possible himself. He wanted the audience to see him, not a stunt double. He wanted Jonathan E. to feel real. Beyond skating, Caan trained physically to look like an athlete. He lifted weights, ran sprints, and worked on his conditioning. He had to appear strong, fast, and intimidating. Jonathan E. was supposed to be a legend, a man other players feared. Caan's body had to match that reputation. He also studied the character's psychology. Jonathan E. wasn't just tough physically. He was stubborn, independent, thoughtful. Caan spent time thinking about what it meant to be the last individual in a world that demanded conformity. He read the script over and over, looking for layers and nuances. By the time filming started, Caan was ready. He could skate, hit, fall, and keep moving. He could convey Jonathan's strength and his loneliness. He could make audiences believe in a man fighting for his identity against impossible odds. 3 months of training for one unforgettable performance. Commitment. Number 1. Norman Jewison wanted the film to start a conversation, not provide answers. The most important thing to understand about Rollerball is that Norman Jewison never intended to give easy answers. He wanted to provoke thought, to raise questions, to make audiences uncomfortable. The film doesn't end with a revolution. It doesn't show the corporations falling or freedom returning. It shows one man refusing to disappear. That's all. And that was deliberate. Jewison believed that movies could do more than entertain. They could challenge, inspire, and warn. Rollerball was his warning about where society might go if people stopped thinking, stopped questioning, stopped fighting for their individuality. He worried about the rise of corporate power, the increasing violence in entertainment, the way people became passive consumers instead of active citizens. He saw these trends in the 1970s and imagined them continuing. The result was Rollerball, a film that showed a nightmare future where everything felt comfortable but nothing was free. Jewison didn't want audiences to leave the theater feeling satisfied. He wanted them to leave troubled, questioning, thinking. He wanted conversations in parking lots, debates over dinner, arguments with friends. He wanted people to ask themselves hard questions. Do we trade freedom for comfort? Do we let entertainment distract us from real problems? Do we accept corporate control because fighting back seems too hard? These questions mattered to Jewison, and he believed they should matter to everyone. Rollerball wasn't just a movie. It was a challenge, an invitation to think critically about the world. Some viewers accepted that invitation. Others rejected it, wanting simple entertainment instead. Jewison didn't mind either reaction. As long as people thought about it, the film succeeded. He started the conversation. We're still having it today. Bonus fact, the film's title almost changed multiple times. Before Rollerball was released, the studio considered changing the title several times. Executives worried that Rollerball sounded too simple, too much like a kid's toy. They wanted something that sounded more serious, more dramatic. They suggested alternatives: The Game, The Last Player, Corporate Wars. Jonathan E. Norman Jewison hated every single one. He argued that Rollerball was perfect because it was direct and memorable. The title didn't need to explain everything, it just needed to stick in people's minds. The studio pushed back. They commissioned surveys, asking test audiences what they thought of different titles. The results were mixed. Some people liked the alternatives. Others preferred Rollerball. The debates continued for weeks, delaying marketing materials and poster designs. Finally, Jewison put his foot down. He threatened to remove his name from the film if they changed the title. He believed Rollerball captured the blunt, brutal nature of the story. It wasn't fancy or complicated. It was exactly what it needed to be. The studio relented, partly because they respected Jewison and partly because they'd run out of time. They went with Rollerball and hoped it would work. And it did. The title became iconic. People remembered it. Decades later, when you say Rollerball, film fans immediately know what you mean. The simplicity that worried executives became the title's greatest strength. It was clear, memorable, and honest. Jewison's instinct was right. Sometimes the obvious choice is the best choice. One word, one decision, one legacy. Rollerball wasn't just a movie about a brutal sport. It was a story about identity, freedom, and the courage to stand alone when the world demands you disappear. Norman Jewison created something rare. A film that entertained while challenging its audience, that showed violence while condemning it, that asked hard questions without offering easy answers. The actors bled, the stunt performers risked everything, and the crew worked tirelessly to build a future that felt disturbingly possible. They created a world where corporations controlled everything, where entertainment replaced meaning, where people lost themselves in spectacle. That world was supposed to be a warning. But warnings only work if we listen. Rollerball reminds us that individuality matters, that questioning authority is essential, that comfort without freedom is a kind of prison. It shows us what happens when we stop fighting for ourselves, when we let others make all our choices, when we trade our names for numbers. The film still resonates today because the questions it asks haven't gone away. They've only become more urgent. Every movie hides truths if you look closely enough. Rollerball's truth is that the future isn't fixed. We shape it with our choices, our actions, our refusal to accept what seems inevitable. Jonathan E. stood alone on that track, battered and bleeding but still standing. That image is the film's heart. One person can matter. One voice can refuse to be silenced. One stand can inspire others. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time.